Hey, Stives here with Beard Logic, bringing you another update to Grave Complex, a survival tower defense game. I've been working on optimizations again this week, primarily focused on getting shadows working for mobile devices. As you might be able to tell, they're looking a lot better than they were before, no more clipping through terrain. And if you switch over to the default Unity shadows, you can see that there's quite a bit of difference, especially around the details of the trees. But Unity shadows add about 100 extra draw calls per frame, so I think we're going to have to stick with our custom version. But certainly for the devices that are able to, they have the option of switching up to the better shadows. Now for those who are interested, I just want to go do a little overview of how I'm getting these shadows to work. I first find the convex hull around the object that I'm working with and project that onto a flat plane. If the shadow mesh was only going to be displayed on a flat surface, then this is all we'd really have to do. However, our terrain's not flat, so this mesh is likely to clip through it. So we need to make the shadow mesh conformable to the terrain. I suppose you could subdivide the mesh to the point where there's so many polygons in it that it would eventually conform to any terrain, but I know that the terrain is laid out in a grid. So all I really had to do was make sure that the shadow mesh was able to conform to the grid-like pattern that I have. So by intersecting mesh at precise intervals corresponding to the grid, I was able to make the shadows conformable to any terrain that's able to be created. So this is the mesh in practice as it's being projected onto the terrain. Because the shadows aren't going to change much on lower end devices, the projection only ever has to happen once. That is whenever an object is placed. So the potential added CPU burden is actually non-existent. I really like the way that the shadow mesh for the trees has turned out. I still need to do a little bit of work on stuff like the walls. They're a bit thinner than I would like. It'd be nice if they were a little more obvious. Anyway, that's not the end of the optimizations for the shadows this week. Once I added these shadows in, I was hoping Unity's dynamic batching system would be able to handle them and make them into a single draw call. But because of the number of vertices in some of the shadows, it just wasn't feasible. But since the shadows aren't moving that much, I just decided to sort of pseudo-statically batch them like I'm doing with the rest of the objects in a given chunk. So this is all the shadows batched together as a single mesh and producing the same result. So now that we have that sorted out, we have the entire scene being rendered with about 60 draw calls per frame. This should work well for all relatively new devices, but for some of the really low-end devices, I think it may still be too high. I have included the option to reduce the overall resolution of the game, and that might be the only real option for low-end devices to function well with this game. I suspect that reducing the resolution of the game may only be perceptible to devices with 2K or greater resolution. So hopefully you get enough device variation in the next live test to be able to tell what works and what doesn't. Once again, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to try and answer them for you. Or if you have any suggestions that would improve this, please let me know. That's all for now. Have a good week.